Hi guys, and welcome back, and today we're going to build and paint the figures that are going into the JRH Darwin 1942 diorama. So it's actually really hard to get 1/35th scale Australian infantry, and I couldn't find any kits of World War II vintage Aussie infantry, but I did find this Revel kit for Anzac infantry 1915, so World War I. And really the main thing I was looking for was the slouch hat. It's a fairly unique hat to the Australian Army, and I thought that was important to have it in the diorama. So I really bought this kit more than anything just because it had a couple of slouch hats in it. Then I added the ICM Gurkha rifles to the pile, and again mainly for the slouch hats, but also the figure on the far left, nearly on both knees. I had a specific need for a figure in that pose, and I thought I could probably use some of the other limbs and perhaps heads from this kit in the build. And then perhaps a little surprisingly, I've gone for the Mini Art German Tank Crew Afrika Korps, and the reason for this was I wanted figures that were just wearing shorts, so I wanted the bare upper torso and legs, and obviously mix and match all the other figures so I can get the right heads with the slouch hats where necessary. And this kit looked to give me the best options for doing that sort of thing. And finally I added a couple of figures to the mix from ResiCast. So this is a resin figure, British forces in North Africa, I'm guessing. This figure's pretty much perfect as it is except for the head because it's got the goggles on top, so I just need to change the head on that, and otherwise we'll build it pretty much stock standard, doing exactly what it's doing. And the final figure, which is another ResiCast figure, is LRDG, Long Range Desert Group figure. And this figure will be the figure that represents my father in the diorama, and largely stock standard again, except for the head, because this is a bearded figure, and Dad wasn't bearded, so I'll just change the head out on that, and otherwise it's pretty much good to go as it is. So just a quick look at the Revel kit initially, and I was pleasantly surprised. Some of the photos I'd seen of these figures built and painted looked not fantastic, and so I sort of had low expectations, but the detail is excellent. My only comment would be that they feel like they're a little over scale, and it's only marginal, and it's certainly not height. So when I put them against, say, the resin figures, the height is correct, but they're just a bigger bodied figure, and perhaps the heads are a little bit bigger. But I guess humans are all different sizes and shapes, and I don't think it looks too bad because it's only marginal, so I was pretty happy with this. The level of detail and moulding is excellent, not very much flash, and it all came together pretty well. The ICM kit Gurkha rifles is just one sprue. It's got all 4 figures on there, and again really cleanly moulded and looks very good level of detail. In comparison to the Revel figures, again, probably the heads most notably marginally smaller, but I'd say these heads are more typically the 1/35th scale heads that we'd be used to. I think the Revel ones are just a little bit bigger, but yeah, really good details. The slouch hats look really nice, and I was very happy with the quality of this kit. So onto the Mini Art German Tank Crew Afrika Korps, and typical of what you'd expect from Mini Art, to be perfectly honest. The plastic's that slightly softer sort of plastic. Little sprue map comes in the box, and look, details okay. A little bit of flash and the typical mould lines, but they're to be expected, so nothing to really complain about. But overall, for what I want, I think they'll work out quite well. So on to the first ResiCast figure, the one that's pouring water. There's a couple of contraptions on the right there. The top one is some big box funnel thing, and I'm not actually quite sure I know what to do with that, so I won't do anything with it. And the small container sits underneath that with a handle, I think, but that might have something to do with the larger box. I'm not quite sure. The figure itself, the legs and upper torso all in one pour, 2 arms and a head. This head's got goggles on it, so I'll swap the heads out, but really crisp and detailed, and what you expect from a good resin figure, so very happy with this figure. It should work really well. And onto the second resin figure from ResiCast, and this is the figure that I'll use to represent Dad, and again very crisp, nice detail, upper and lower torso and legs all in one bit, the 2 arms, the hat, and 2 heads, both of which have beards for some reason, so I won't be using either of those. I'll swap those out, but yeah, really happy with this figure. It's very nicely moulded, and I think it will come up very well, hopefully. So on with the build, and I thought what I'd do is just show a little bit of technique as far as cleaning the mould lines away. So I do this with each piece, the torso, the legs, the head, each individual piece, and start off with the a fresh X-Acto blade and very light pressure. It's really just scooting along the surface to take off the most obvious parts of the mold line, trying carefully to preserve the integrity of the model so you don't want to end up with flat spots or anything like that. And then when I've got the bulk of it off, and that might not necessarily be all of it, and here I'm just looking at the shorts with this creases there, so it's a matter of being careful, just taking what you can get without pushing the matter too hard. Then I come back in with a small file, usually the sort of half rounded side and a flat side, and it gives you a few different angles you can go in. And again, really light pressure, not trying to do too much with it, and just letting the file itself do the work and guiding it over. Not getting caught on the highlight areas either, so you don't want to lose any definition of the moulding there. And then come in with the lowest grit, or perhaps the highest grit, I can't remember, the finest. This is almost like a polishing stick. It's virtually got no grit at all, and that usually cleans them up. So I won't show all of the figures, I'll just get into the construction of them now. And again, just by way of example, once I've got all the different limbs, so here I've got some Africa core figures and I've got some Gurkha figure pieces, putting them together, I just sort of blue tack it all up to make sure it looks vaguely like I want, and that also shows me where I might have to do some adjustment in where things join, and if I need wire to hold arms on or legs on, etc. So I was a little bit surprised with the first ResiCast figure that I put together, the guy pouring the water, some really big gaps in the joints around the arms. As you can see, I swapped the head out with the other ResiCast head, actually, with the beard. But I was surprised because there was no way you could get him to hold the water container properly with the arms snugly fitted. So big gap in the left shoulder, which I had to pin, and that's no big deal, but I was a little bit surprised for the quality of the kit. So I pretty much put both the ResiCast figures together because it was really just whacking the arms and the head on. So I replaced the head on this for a clean-shaven head, which looks quite good and is proportionally good with the rest of the model. A few issues with fit around the arms, but it's just little gaps, minor filling required around the shoulders, but you pretty much have to do that anyway if you want to get rid of the seam or the join lines. But the detail is really nice and crisp overall. Bit of a join issue in the neck where I fitted the new head in. That needs to be filled, and just a bit of a moulding flaw in the hat, very thin, and a bit of a hole there, but that's easily fixed. So I really like using this acrylic plastic putty, Vallejo, and you can just paint it in. I use a really fine brush, and I try to keep it to a minimum. I don't want a lot of overflow, and that just makes it easy to clean up later on. But it's just a matter of taking your time and working it in, letting it dry, working a little bit more in, and I find it gets really good results. It's good stuff. So just for completeness, I'll show the filling of all 5 figures, or the finished job anyway, and then do a quick whiz through on the cleanup. And really it was around the shoulder joints in the main that always seems to be an issue. This stuff's really good because you don't need a lot of force to get it off. I just use a X-Acto blade to carefully take the stuff away from the main area, and it's pretty easy to get off, and just a polishing stick to pick up any other little bits and pieces. As always, I think it's just a matter of being really careful and patient, and I'd rather spend 5 minutes doing this than 1 minute and then find I have to do it all over again. So yeah, just working my way through and taking out any of the surplus material as necessary. So we'll just have a quick look at all 5 figures. So the filling and filing and sanding has been finished, and the next step will be the priming. Now, this guy's right arm was actually a sort of largish piece of reconstructive work. Had to break the elbow and the wrist and twist it a little bit, and then pretty large gaps to be filled with milliput, and virtually had to reconstruct the lower part of the forearm with milliput. And sadly, in the excitement of doing it, forgot to turn the camera on, so I didn't have any footage of actually putting that together. It doesn't look great when you review it at the moment. The sanding isn't as good as it should have been. I didn't realise that at the time. I certainly realised it after I'd primed it and had to go back in and do a fair bit of work to get it a bit better. So on with the painting, and in this video what I thought I'd do is spend a little bit more time and do something a little bit more like a tutorial. I see lots of comments across all the various channels that it seems a lot of people are a little bit reluctant or nervous about painting figures, and I'm probably the exact opposite. I love painting figures, and look, by no means, no stretch of the imagination would I attempt to pass myself off as an expert, but I do enjoy doing them, and I've been experimenting a lot over the last couple of months with different techniques. So I thought I'd show what I'm currently using, and it's an evolving learning curve for me as well, but I was pretty happy with the results, and look, it might be helpful for some of you who are less enthusiastic about figures than others. I just find figures really forgiving. I think you almost can't do anything wrong. So let's take a look, and there's probably about 20 minutes worth of painting to go. So given there was a lot of flesh exposed on 3 of the 5 of these figures, I thought it'd just be simpler to base coat them in the basic flesh colour. And for that I use Vallejo's beige red, and with a little touch of leather brown, so probably into the airbrush 10 drops of the beige red to 1 drop of the leather brown, and then probably 5 drops of just the Vallejo airbrush thinners. So then I wanted to do some pre-highlighting, so I used the basic skin tone and some Iraqi sand, so the same ratio, 5 drops of the basic skin tone to 1 drop of Iraqi sand. And the reason for that was I just wanted to do some pre-highlighting. The figures will all be facing in the same direction. I wanted the appearance of the sun hitting them as they all look in that direction, into the sun basically. So as I'd said earlier, often after you've done the priming, and even with the first couple of coats, you might suddenly realise there's some deficiencies in your filling and there's still a little gap here or there, or you might have actually missed something altogether. Often the paint brings that out, it's easier to see. So it's just a matter of going back in again, trying to be minimalistic with the amount of filler that you use, and just being reasonably careful in then cleaning it all up. So on with the painting, and just a brief explanation of the wet palette. Basically it's just a sponge in a container that's wet with a little bit of like baking paper over the top, and that just helps you control the consistency of acrylic paints. So the Australian uniform is basically khaki, and I'll just be using khaki as the primary colour, and then lots of different shades of that by adding lighter or darker colours to it. I try and work as cleanly as I can on the palette, and here just showing controlling the consistency, so you're adding a little bit of water. With the painting of the figures, I've moved towards lots of very thin layers rather than just straight from the bottle and perhaps 1 coat, which is okay, but I find when I look at those figures now, the paint can look quite thick and chunky in places, so I thought I'd move towards lots of little coats like this. The paint's quite thin, but somewhere between straight from the bottle and what you'd consider a traditional wash, and I'll show the difference a little bit further on in the video in terms of what the washes actually look like and how the paint behaves. So I just wanted some tonal difference for the jacket, so using stone grey as the colour to lighten that up a little bit. Just put some of that on the palette again, and just a matter of getting the consistency right and then mixing it back in with the base colour, and I do that with all of the new colours I introduce. I always bring it back with some of the base colour, and I just feel that helps blend it in quite nicely. And again, lots of thin little coats, and this was really done almost as another layer of pre-shading, so that when a uniting coat of khaki comes on later on, the jacket's just a slightly different tone. It's really subtle, and it's very hard to pick up from the camera in the lighting, but in person it definitely makes a difference. So I've no particular pattern to painting, and maybe that will develop with time, but I sort of work on the where can I go next, because I've got very little patience for waiting for things to dry. So using my favourite German camouflage black-brown, made a slightly more diluted version to do what will be the first of about 4 different brown washes over the over the sandals in this case. This guy's wearing sandals, which is pretty cash. I also used the same colour as the base for his hair. Dad had brown hair, so that was fairly straightforward. And again, slightly diluted just so it gets into all the crevices. So introducing a little bit of off-white into the palette now, and this is just to start building a uniting wash of a slightly different tone of the khaki. So used a little bit of the stone grey mix with a little bit of the German camouflage black, brown, and now a little bit of the white, and then lots of water. And looking at the consistency, when you stretch out the paint, you just want it to contract a little bit, and I'm not sure what the technical term for that is, but when I see it doing that, I know it's thin enough to go on and have a nice effect. So you can see there's a few steps to this. So back now with a pure khaki and just making a reasonably thin wash of that. And again, just doing that test to see that there's enough water in there and it contracts. And when it gets to a point where it seems to happen quickly enough, and there's no science to this, it's just my instinct, then it feels like it's right. And look, I just applied this to the shorts and any of the areas on the jacket where I thought there'd be shading under the arms, just to get a little bit of darkness. Also across the back, probably just in my mind to represent a little bit of sweat or perspiration that might have built up and discoloured the jacket in certain places. Again, ultimately it's quite subtle and hard to pick up the detail on the video. The lighting really is challenging, but it does seem to make a difference, especially when you look at all the figures together. You can see the tonal variations and it looks like different levels of wear and tear. It comes up pretty well. So now just adding in a little bit of field grow, I think that's how you pronounce it. Sorry, Jens, if I've butchered that. And again, same philosophy, even with that, adding a little bit of the khaki into it, not very much, just enough to give it that trace of the khaki in what is effectively the sort of the pale grey, and maybe perhaps a lot of mucking around, because this is ultimately just to do about half a dozen buttons. I think I'll come back and use it later on for the bandage. Again, for me, it feels like it unifies everything, and I know that's probably hard to explain when you say, well, you just put grey on it, but it seems to blend in more naturally with the base colour added into it. So the next little bit is just more washes and some of the detail work, so I'll give you a break from my voice for a little while and come back when we start to do some highlighting. So on with the highlighting now, and not quite as runny a mix as the previous ones, and then just used very sparingly on all of the prominent areas of the uniform, and just being really careful and not using very much at all, and just looking for places where either wear or light would be catching, just to brighten it up a little bit. And hopefully you can see the tonal differences there between the jacket and the shorts, and the overall sort of unified appearance of the colour scheme. So onto the flesh, and perhaps a little bizarrely using blue and fire red, and I use that to get some undertone in the skin, if you like. So trying to replicate the tonal qualities of the veins and blemishes and all that sort of stuff. It's unless you're a supermodel, not too many of us have perfect alabaster skin. So just trying to get that underneath, so that then it's following that with a succession of washes. So looking for that sort of a purpley skin tone colour, if that makes sense. And then an incredibly diluted wash, as you can see, mostly water. And it's really just a methodology that I'm finding works quite nicely to move pigment around. So once you get it on, you can really start to poke at it and get it into the places that you want with the brush. And it doesn't necessarily look fantastic when it first dries. It can group in areas. It'll obviously gravitate towards low areas. But what you can do is then come back in with a brush, just with clean water on the tip, and start to clean up areas where you don't want it, and it reactivates the pigment, so you can move it around a little bit to where you do want it. You'll see here, trying to get that sort of carotid artery highlighted, and again, I tend to put more on and then take most of it off. I think it has to be subtle. It would look ridiculous if it was a bright blue line. So there's an example of the undertone, remembering that there'll be more skin tone going over the top of that, but some of those angles sort of capture that veiny sort of appearance that I've been looking for. So with a bit of cleanup, I'm reasonably happy with the way that's come. And then it's just a matter of putting the successive layers of very diluted washes on, and a little bit paler, so that you get that translucence and you can sort of see what's going on underneath. And then I just fiddle around with the face, and just looking to do some highlighting and capturing where the light might be hitting, and so different sort of diluted washes of paler flesh tones. On this figure, you'll notice that I tended to concentrate more on the right hand side of the face in terms of the lighting, and getting that sort of sunlight capturing that side of the face, because the left hand side of the face is more protected by the hat and would be in greater shade, so a little bit darker, and I think that's come up pretty well. So just to round out the flesh painting, or the skin tones, fresh palette for another figure, basic skin tone, the light skin tone, some Iraqi sand, some white, and then brown, red and blue. And they're pretty much all the colours that I've used. So I'll paint a figure now with just the shorts on, and a little bit more skin to use. And with the guys who were just wearing shorts, I was trying to get the effect of perhaps a more suntanned skin tone, so a little bit more red in tone, but again across the three figures in particular, wanted to get some variation in there. So again, on top of the basic skin tone cover, the very diluted wash of the bluey. This is a little bit more blue than the previous one was a bit more purple. I think I preferred this as far as the end result went. Now, while I'm doing the hair, you can also see that it doesn't look great on the upper torso, but that's prior to going back in with just a clean wet brush and starting to remove the surplus and poking the stuff around to where I want it to be, so it looks very blotchy there. It really is just a matter of patience, and so this is a really time-consuming process. I think realistically each figure probably took 5 hours from start to finish of continuous work, but I'm really happy with the results. So I guess it depends what you're into, and if you like figures like I do, it's great fun. So the 5 hours, just flies. I lose all track of time. So just doing the eyes with this figure in a little bit more detail to illustrate that. And again, I do it in many layers, so I don't believe you have to get everything right first time. So you need to get the white in. I accept that there'll be some overpaint there. That's no big deal. I'll just follow that with some of the skin tone and clean that up until you're happy with the overall shape of the whites of the eyes. And then the trickiest part, of course, I find is getting the eyeball in. And in this instance, I wanted this guy to be looking slightly to his left, so that probably doesn't sound all that complicated, but I found it very hard. So whilst you're seeing this done in one go, I'd had a couple of prior goes to get it right. Ultimately happy with it, but I think it makes a big difference. All these guys on the dio will be looking in the same direction, so I had to keep that in mind when I was doing all of their eyes. Where were they on the diorama base, and what way was their head pointing, and that determined where their eyeballs were. So it was a little bit tricky because it could be easy to lose track of that sort of stuff. And then just building up the skin tone layers with the lips, a little bit of red, but not much. I also put a little bit of brown out in the bush. In the sun, people's lips can be cracked and dry and discoloured. So again, tried to go for a more natural look if I was able to. You might notice on the left pec muscle, the chest, my rather poor attempt at a tat, which is there underneath, but very hard to write. Very small, so it will remain forever a secret what my attempt was. And at this point, the finishing line was in sight, so it's just a matter of doing a little bit of clean-up of the discoloration of the flesh tone, clean brush whitening that out, and then getting a few very diluted washes on. So show you a little bit of that, and then come back and we'll get into the details and final reveal. So that's it, and really happy with the way they came out. So just do a quick scan of all 5 figures together now, and then we'll go back and have another little bit of music and look at each one of them individually. But yeah, really pleased with the way they came out. I think they'll look good on the Dio base, and as usual, I'll do the final weathering once they're stuck down to the base with the soft pastels, etc., so that it all blends in together. But I'll come back after the slideshow and say goodbye. And that's it. So, look, guys, thanks for watching. A bit longer than normal, but hopefully you enjoyed the video and a little bit of extra detail around the painting and the technique that I'm developing. I was pretty happy with the results, and hopefully it has been helpful to someone out there. So, thanks again, and take care all. See you next time. Bye.